This is what it looked like in Brussels this morning. Crowds fleeing the departure hall of the capital city's airport after two explosions went off, killing at least 10 people and wounding 100 more around 8 this morning, local time. An hour later, a bomb went off at the metro station near the European Union headquarters, killing at least 20 more and wounding another 130. ISIS has since claimed responsibility. Raids were carried out around Belgium throughout the day, while in the U.S., major cities, including ours, Boston, are tightening security, particularly in mass transit areas, though Massachusetts State Police say there's no intelligence that suggests an attack here is planned. Joining me now are Jeb Sharp. Jeb's a reporter of the PRI's The World, located here at GBH, recently back from Belgium. Jeb, good to see you. Jutta Clausen, who teaches international cooperation at Brandeis, heads the Center for European Studies at Harvard, is the founder of the Western Jihadism Project. It's a group that collects data on Islamic extremist groups in the West. Good to see you again, too. Brussels has essentially become a launching pad for terrorism in Europe, the launching pad. Madrid, Paris, obviously its own locales in its city. How did this happen? Why did this happen?
Well, it's funny. I'd like to hear what Jutta has to say about that. But
well,
you said has become.
Yeah.
But it goes back a long, long time. And you mentioned Madrid, but it goes even further back. And I spoke to a writer recently who grew up in one of these segregated immigrant, mostly Muslim neighborhoods.
Like Molenbeek that we're going to talk about in a minute. Yeah.
And he remembers in the 80s recruitment going on at the mosques for to join the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets.
So Jutta, she wants to hear how it started. You tell us both. How did it start? Why did this come to pass?
Well, what we're dealing with now is an extremely successful recruitment drive on the part of the Islamic State among young Westerners who have been gang members. Bob Reinrath, who is the director of Europol, said in early March that 80% of the travelers to the Islamic State, they estimate, have a background in gangs.
But just staying with Belgium for a second, my understanding is the largest per capita number of fighters who end up in Syria is coming from Belgium, of all the European states. Why are they the outlier here?
Well, so the gangs do have a role to play. Belgium has a huge problem with gangs in that particular neighborhood. So we have this convergence between gangs and jihadists. And these are very dangerous people because they are used to carrying out violence. And yes, it is because there has been underground hubs. There's been a group that was known as Sharia for Belgium that has been recruiting there now since 2010. And they have been very active, and the Belgian police was not very successful in cracking down on them.
I'm going to talk about the Belgian police in a second, but it is so much the norm, and maybe that's too strong a word, that I know you've talked about their support groups amongst parents of kids who have become jihadis.
Yes,
is that
exactly
so?
what we're just talking about, people going. There are now parents who have to band together because they are grieving so many young people. I met people from a support group that has 48 families as members. And that's really poignant when you're right up against the human piece of it.
Do they blame themselves? I mean, I know they're not a monolith.
I think they blame themselves, and I think society really blames them. There's a huge amount of shame that comes
in
with
that larger
territory.
community.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
you both mentioned Molenbeek. Let's talk about it for a minute. And people have heard of it. Most of us hadn't before. This is where obviously Abdeslam, amongst others, was captured 4 days ago. What's life like there? What's life like for them? I want to talk about the police and the government in a minute. What's life like for the people who live there?
Well, it's like Brooklyn, old housing stock that has been taken over by immigrants and by hipsters. I'm happy to go there. It's not a bad place to go.
So why is it the breeding ground for so much horror around the world if it's like Brooklyn?
There is what we call complex contagion between the extremists who have been recruiting there for years and the gangs. And that's when things go bad. That's when you have multiple sources that reinforce each other in these types of recruitment processes. Many of these people, we know the Paris attackers who came out of Molenbeek all had a background in gangs, and they all went to the Islamic State.
But you know what's amazing to me, Jeb, is when you hear about this from outside, unlike the two of you who have been there and know it firsthand, law enforcement knows this. Government officials know this. The sense I get from afar is that at least pieces of Molenbeek there's no government, there's no law enforcement, there's the no snitching thing that we all learned about here in Boston. That's a fair description of what it's like, right? It's sort of
I think that's
there
right,
and they
yeah.
pray that it's
Yeah.
contained, and
Yeah.
often it's not, yeah?
And even as they try to get better at getting a handle on the program, austerity measures have cut back on police forces. And Matthew Levitt, a former U.S. official and terrorism expert, has been talking about this a lot. They're down 185 police officers in Molenbeek alone, and he's been stressing that. That's a big challenge.
And getting to this no snitching thing, they do protect each other, I assume. When we heard that Abdus-Salam was, what, a quarter of a mile, 10 minutes away from his own home and his mother's, and the only reason they ended up getting him, a primary reason, is because a woman who was with him ordered so many pizzas that authorities said, well, that's odd. There must be a lot of people in that. How can he be hiding in plain sight and they not get it?
Well, it's because it's embedded in a community that's already very anti-state and very anti-government.
Is that what explains when I learned that they didn't allow, I don't know if this has been changed at the time of the Paris attacks,
night
which is when I
raids.
first met you when you called into our radio show, they do not allow nighttime raids. So they're basically saying to tourists or tourists in waiting, don't worry, when the sun goes down until it comes up, you're safe, just worry starting tomorrow morning. I mean, is that what explains that?
But one more point on the snitching. Can I just interrupt? Sometimes it is a very human thing too. This is, as you say, an anti-state in a way place, a place that feels beleaguered and separate and discriminated against too. You can flip it that way. And someone said to me, imagine being a mother and getting scared that your kid's radicalizing. Is the first thing you're going to do go to the police? In a logical sense, yes, please, given what's happening. But in a kind of human sense, is that what people do? Someone raised that with me when I was pushing them on it.
But it seems to me, getting back to the police, that you mentioned the resource deprivation there, but it seems to go to one extreme or the other. Either no night police raids and that sort of thing, or the flip side is after the carnage has happened, they essentially shut down their city. I assume that'll end at some point. And then we'll go through the same cycle all over again. What's it like for a Muslim kid starting today or after the Paris attacks? What's it like for a Muslim kid in Brussels or somewhere in Belgium today?
Well, everywhere.
A peaceful Muslim kid.
Well, everywhere. I mean, so it's a very complex picture because there are a lot of Muslims working in the police force. A lot of Muslims.
I hear it's overwhelmingly white, which is part of the
in
problem.
the local, but so the issue is that Belgium is a highly layered federalized state, and the local police in Molenbeek is not really in charge of this situation anymore. This is now a federal and a French issue. The French police has been cooperating and inserted its forces. They've been part of the raids. But for instance, one of the men who was shot last week, we now learn, is actually an Algerian from Sweden who in 2014 went to the Islamic State and came back to Brussels. So it's not all about Molenbeek, it's not all about Brussels, it's actually about Europe. It's about these fluid, open borders, and there's no real coordination within Europe about how to attack and deal with this problem.
Speaking about open borders, we only have 30 seconds left, Jeb. I assume this deals another blow to a continent that has dealt far more hospitably with refugees than has the United States. This is going to create even a higher and higher obstacle, right?
I think that's right. They're having so much trouble figuring it out, and this just adds the perception that they can't deal with terrorism as well as refugees.
Jeb, thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for
It's
the
good
chat.
to see you yet
Good
again.
to see you.
Appreciate it.